Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So in this episode, we're going to look at working with the body in training and coaching. So this is really one of my specialist topics. For the last 10 years, I've run a training company working in the UK and about 30 other countries that specialised in bringing the body into business, into organisations. I've trained a lot of life coaches, in particular, many kinds of organisations myself. So who's it for? Well, this episode really is if you're a trainer and coach, of course, or a facilitator or a learning synergizer, whatever the jargon is currently. So if you're one of those people, great. This is really for you. This is some super specialist knowledge. It's one of the few things I actually claim to know a little bit about. The other group of people that might be interested in this podcast are people that are working with the body, say in martial arts or dance or yoga or body therapy, and they're thinking, could I become a coach? Could I bring that into coaching? Because I work with coaches. Maybe I could do a bit of business work. If you're from that group, make sure you look to the other podcast on working in business, a guide for hippies as well. That's another ebook. This is really coming from an ebook called Working with the Body in Training and Coaching, an ebook that you can find online. And I'm using that as a kind of base for tonight. There's so much I could say about this subject. We're certainly going to look at, how you get started in this, what's some good frameworks to use, some of the skills you're going to be using, some concrete tools you can use, working with groups, working with individuals, some of the sort of science and things underneath this. I'm just hoping I don't go on for too long because this is, as I said, a rich subject that I've been researching. I've worked with all different kinds of coaches, all different kinds of trainers. The Embodied Facilitator course, which we do, is really training those kind of people as well. Let's dive in. So what is embodiment? We've looked at that on the podcast before. There's a whole podcast on that. So the subjective sense of the body. So when I say working with the body in training and coaching, obviously I don't just mean the body athletic or the body as an object, but the lived experience of the body. So I guess the first point I'd say is, well, this is just a part of who we are. It's a key part of who we are. If as a coach or a trainer, you're not working with the body, you're missing a trick. Like, this is a key part of how we operate, and therefore any kind of change efforts that we might want to go through. When I'm working with, say, corporates, I'd say, look, this embodied methodology, I wouldn't necessarily even use the word, is a way of going deep quickly, getting results and getting results that stick. So they could be thought of as the benefits. And if we come to a talk later about selling embodied work for, training and coaching, that's the kind of key pieces. I actually speaking to a corporate client on the phone today, never worked with me before, they had me recommended, and they said, I've heard this thing called embodied leadership, and someone said you were the guy for it in Europe. And I said, yeah, I can see why I got the call. And they said, what's it about? And I said, explain, well, it's an interactive way of training and it's about getting results and going deep quickly and sticking. Because I said something like, well, you've probably got some clever people there that know their job, which is usually the case. But they may have read all the books, done the MBA, but something's still lacking. They're still having problems. And I then asked her, what the problems were they were having, and then spoke to how the body could help with those. That wasn't immediately obvious to this person who's sort of picking up the phone on a referral and didn't really know much about the subject. And in a way, that's kind of typical that there can be barriers there with corporate clients. For example, there's this sort of anxiety of, well, what is it? And isn't the body just sort of something about like sex or sports or something like that? Coaches, I find, are much more open to it. So generally when coaches come to workshops, like I just did a one-day training in Brighton, all kinds of coaches from all sort of schools there, they generally have some sense the body matters. It's generally not too hard to sell for the average coach or trainer. They kind of get that it's important, but they're not exactly sure why. They're not exactly sure how they can work with it in a practical way. So that's what I tend to flesh out and say, like in that workshop, give people some sort of practical tools. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this podcast as well. So, so we talked about the precautions here. Like some corporates may not be allowing touch. So you might, for me, not being too heavy on the touch and certainly going into that gently, looking at consent in a big way. being aware, in a business sort of training environment, there may be people, their bosses in the room, which is quite different than, if I go to, say, my 5 Rhythms dance class on a Wednesday night, there's generally not, colleagues in the room in the same way, the kind of dynamics that might be in the same way as in a sort of a business training environment. There can often be, trauma around the body, being aware of some of the things like consent and calibration, like ethical issues around this. I'm guessing if you're an embodiment type person, this isn't totally new to you. And there's other podcasts on those specifically. So general framework I'd present to people, whether they're coaches or trainers, is to say, look, there's different contexts of the body. There's a layer that's all human. There's a cultural layer. And there's this personal historical layer, this way in which our body solidifies into sets of habits, a way of being, a way of staying safe, a way of getting love. We have these personal habits. So when you look at a body, you're not looking at meat, you're looking at history, you're looking at a way of being. And then I also acknowledge that there's situational and relational contexts, or else people would just say, well, it kind of depends, where I am and who I'm with and what I'm doing. And I'm like, yeah, it's all true. But there's also this part of you that we want to look at. This idea that part of us is running the show. So in terms of a coaching context, you can ask the best question in the world to someone cerebrally, but if their embodiment is stuck in a particular way of being, that's not going to help, right? There's the same old embodiments running the show, whether it's in a company or whether it's an individual in a coaching session. So to highlight those, to bring awareness to those, the model of embodied intelligence is one I use a lot, taken from Daniel Goleman's model of emotional intelligence. And there we're looking at, sort of asking people, how am I, sort of self-awareness and self-regulation, teaching those skills, which again, massively useful in coaching and training. Self-awareness, and then moving on to social awareness, how other people and being able to influence people. So in training, I might be looking at stress management, which is often the self-regulation. It might be like communication skills, which is as much about the empathy, team building, which is about, how groups of people connect, obviously, and leadership. So looking at the influence, the impact, charisma, gravitas, those kind of things are part of the package or the cell in terms of why the body matters and the sort of places it shows up. But it could be in anything. So even if, say, I'm doing something that looks quite dry in a training, like, a time management workshop, don't do so many of those now, but did do in the past. And I was, early days in business, and I was going, I'll just do whatever workshops you want. Even time management is actually really about commitment management, about, I've got a tendency, you've probably noticed on this podcast, to rush, speak quite quickly and rush. So that, that's an embodied issue as much as anything. And I consciously track that and try and slow myself down. My apologies to all the listeners who don't have English as their first language, or that find my British accent hard while I'm at that subject. Something like time management really could be about stress management, really could be about commitment, how you are with all kinds of issues that are embodied. So basic model of embodied intelligence. If you Google embodied intelligence or put that into YouTube, you'll see a diagram there. If you're obviously, if you're listening on the podcast, you won't be able to see that, and to be able to flesh that out. All right, let's talk about your own foundation. Often trainers and coaches come to me and they say sort of, I'm fine, just give me some tools. And I'll say, hang on a minute, let's take a step back, Stuart Heller says we move through space like we move through life. Hopefully we'll get him on the podcast. And that's equally true as a trainer or a coach. We do our facilitation as we move. We do our coaching as we move. So the basic foundation for anyone in training and coaching is these embodied skills, particularly the self-awareness, to know your tendencies, to know what you might be good at, to be able to self-regulate yourself. I was on teaching a webinar the other day, and I asked a really tough question, like properly, someone really didn't like something I'd said and really, aimed a really vicious question at me. And I sat back in my chair, I breathed, did my, the whole centering stuff you can find on the centering podcast, and then made my response. And as a facilitator, that can happen, right? This skills to get ourselves together under the difficulty and the pressure. Particularly if I'm training, I might be a long way from home in a corporate hotel. It might be travel difficulties, all kinds of pressure. There's a lot of stress in the room just because of people, what people bring and some of the elements I work in. So that's self-regulation. And also the expression, as a trainer, being able to be in your body and express yourself, move through the body, to move through the different emotions, that's a massive skill in training in terms of how compelling you'll be, how much presence you'll have, whether people will listen to a word you're saying. You could even hear it in my voice if I just go blah, 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 without any kind of emotional expression on this podcast, you'd get bored pretty quick. All right. So even more so, kind of in the moment, in the room. So I'd say, this self-awareness and self-regulation is absolutely your foundation. As a trainer of any kind, even if you're not really wanting to work with the body, you're just, a random trainer or coach just happen to find this podcast. Then that is still your foundation. And it's not really controversial. When I'm working with different other coaching organizations, they sometimes bring me in, or leadership schools, and I say, this is all based on self-awareness. That's not really controversial, I'd say. And obviously the body's where a big part of that begins. I think the thing that embodied practitioners add is this long-term practice. So maybe you've heard the podcast by now on practice, the long-term practice, how we develop ourselves as people, whether that's yoga or aikido or tango or whatever it is, that we're able to have this method for developing ourselves, for working on ourselves. And when I hear people say, I've done a lot of work on myself as a coach, I'm like, well, what have you been doing? Was it a weekend course? Was it, listening to a podcast? Well, that's great. This podcast, you can learn a lot from this, but the real work is in the practice. For example, on EFC, the main embodiment course I run, to be a trainer on that course, and there's only a few qualified in the world, you have to have 10,000 hours practice in at least 2 different embodiment arts and 1,000 hours in 4 or 5 others, just to have the sort of repertoire that I think teaching embodiment excellently to other trainers and coaches requires. Now, that doesn't mean we insist all our students have that much. People are coming as, say, really regular corporate coaches without the body background. Then, we say, look, just get on the path to walk with an embodied art, take up a martial art or a dance form or a type of something you enjoy, take it up and build those skills as an embodied trainer or coach, which is going to just massively benefit you. And we've had super experienced life coaches and trainers come to our courses, 20, 30 years in. And after a few years of embodiment, they're like, wow, this is really transforming how I'm working. This is really adding a lot. And often there's a lot of leverage to be gained by bringing the body in, just on this level of your foundation of yourself. So I really want to stress this. I can't underline this enough, that if you're working in training and coaching, particularly if you work with the body, but even if you're not, this foundation of your own individual practice is vital. This is one guy in my industry who doesn't have it, who doesn't have his own practice, and he's even written a book on this subject. I'm like, dude, where's that foundation? I'm not even snobby about what it is, but you need something as your foundation in body practice. It's preferable, I would say, if it includes a relational element like dance or some forms of martial arts, and not just a solo element like, I don't know, Tai Chi often is. That can be good, but it's so developing range is a key thing here, which we'll come to as well. You also need to get some embodied feedback, right? So as a trainer or coach, or as someone who wants to be that, realizing how you come across to people. Now, we all have a personality, we all have an embodiment. Most people are fairly blind to that. It's like the taste of your own mouth, or I sometimes make the joke of the feel of very comfortable underpants. Yeah, you're probably not aware of your underwear as you listen, your socks if you prefer, as you listen to this podcast, because you've just gotten used to it. It's just something you've habituated to. So, how do we become aware of this? Because this is what we're constantly projecting as a trainer or coach. This is you can hear some of mine in my voice, no doubt. There's other factors like, it's late at night, or I'm in a particular room or whatever. Which is, by the way, it's quite late here on a autumnal night in Brighton. I can hear that in my voice, actually. It's the way in which that impacts me, that environment. But also my personality comes across, my disposition, my character is the word I like. This like semi-permanent but not totally ingrained part of us, which you can develop through time. That is coming across to everyone else. So any coaching, any training you're doing, that is being communicated. Or maybe you're wanting to work in, say, more mainstream environments, but you're not sure how you come across, and maybe you come across a bit floaty or a bit kind of hippie. Even if you wore a suit, you might still come across that way. I've definitely seen it. I was with a friend of mine today, actually, a wonderful friend of mine. She dances a lot, she does contacts and all sorts. But she's like really what I'd call airy and watery, to use that model. I'll maybe come back to that. And she would have big problems just with her embodiment working in the corporate world. And I think it's only recently she's realized that this is kind of a way of being which other people delight in, but also has a certain impact. So how do we get feedback on this thing, right? If we can't feel it ourselves, one would be to go through a range of embodied options. So to go through a range of, say, embodied yoga principles, postures, they're ones I use, the 4 elements model to dance in different ways, and feel what fits. Yeah, to feel what fits. Another one is to get feedback directly, video yourself, and to have people copy you in your movement and your posture. And this is really good exercise. I've done this lots of times. I think it's originally from dance movement therapy or something, but then lots of times with groups on leadership trainings when I've been working with other coaches too, where you have someone stand like you stand, or even better, walk like you walk, and you look at them and you go, who is this? Yeah, who is this? What is this a body for? What is this a body for? And you observe them. If you go to YouTube, I'm putting copying for awareness raising and empathy in coaching. Very long title, I know. Couple copying and awareness raising in coaching. You'll find an example of this. And it really does. You look at yourself and it's like hearing your own voice. You know, I don't want to particularly hear back a lot of the podcasts that I do, because it's a little painful. You know, even though I can learn from it, and I listen to them, I can learn from it. I don't particularly like hearing my own voice. Yeah. Despite what my detractors say, because it's like, ow, cringe, you know, I'm in my own head, I sound like a kind of cool British Han Solo or some shit, you know, and actually in reality it's like, so it can be kind of painful to see yourself. So do be delicate and gentle with yourself, be forgiving if you see yourself like this, and you go, wow, I had no idea that I came across that way. And you can get the person doing it, say, well, how does it feel, you know? And I was doing this with someone, I'm known for my confidence and sometimes overconfidence. And I was doing this and someone said, I feel like I can do anything. And I was like, yeah, obviously, do you not? And all of a sudden realized, like, wow, that's kind of just how I am. And it feels weird for me that other people don't have that. And yeah, it's good for empathy as well. So anyway, seeing yourself, and this idea of also going through various forms and seeing how you deviate from forms. This is a basic principle of embodiment. We expose ourselves through doing forms, and you start to get a sense of what's my base as a trainer or coach. Now, if you're not a trainer or coach listening to this, this goes equally as manager, parent, therapist, dance teacher, whatever you are. Super useful general principle. Obviously building that skill of self-awareness in the moment too, so you are repeatedly asking yourself throughout the day, how am I? Now I can answer that question very quickly. You know, like now if I check in with my body, it's like, okay, I'm a bit tired, but I'm happy to be doing this. And, you know, how am I else? I'm kind of a little sad that I'm not being around my wife. Or, you know, I can talk about a few things, but I can tune into that fairly quickly with some distinctions. But that's certainly a skill that I've built, and it's a bodily skill. And some of the more sort of heady coaches and trainers I work with really need to develop that skill of being able to tune in quite quickly, not to sort of close your eyes and meditate for 10 minutes, because that emotional sense is already communicating and impacting others, to be aware of it quite quickly. Yeah, that basic sort of mindfulness of the body. All right, centering skills, listening to the podcast on that. Why don't we all do one together? Just as a bit of a review, we'll do a classic ABC centering technique. This is one that is a super useful thing for coaches and trainers of all kinds. As Wendy Palmer says, if you want to help someone, get yourself together. Okay, aware, so being mindful right now, eyes open, particularly if you're driving, present moment, the body, the breathing, the posture, what parts of you are touching the ground, how is your breath, balancing your posture, balancing your physical body, whether you're standing or sitting, as balanced as you can, left to right, front and back, up and down, and also balancing your awareness. If people sometimes are a little floppy, they need a bit of extension, you can have a visualization of, say, a light, or Paul Linden, one of my teachers, says the glowworm, so you're shining. That's another way of getting balance in all directions. Relaxing your core, so relaxing your mouth, your belly. And this is something you can do if a coach or a trainer, if you just find yourself a bit anxious at any point. And connecting to what you care about and connecting to other people. Sometimes as a trainer or a coach, it's just about looking at people and going, oh, they're like me. They've got a lot in common with me. Yeah, or looking at a friend in the audience, or someone you particularly get on with that you're training, or imagining that if you have a very hostile group and there's no such person around. And you'll probably find, like I'm finding now, that changes your state considerably. Lots more techniques on the centering, but a good basis for training and coaching. I'm going to come back to this when I talk about tools for working with clients later on. Again, loads of videos on centering on YouTube if you want to look that up. Another nice quote here: "We're the first system we must learn to manage." That's from Stuart Heller again. Good teacher, Stuart Heller. All right, so body facilitation. What is it? What is it? What are the levels we could start to understand this at? I think of it as like there's different levels to understand it at that are more or less important, though all of them are important to some degree. So I've talked about being, your own embodied presence. This is going to be time and time again technique. If a teacher has working with a master teacher the last few days in a training, and they just have a way of being which is extremely loving, extremely present, and it almost doesn't matter what they do, just people want to be around that, and people have strong breakthroughs and responses to that when they're teaching, even though like technically some of the stuff they're doing I'm looking at going could be improved. And then you've got to understand also there's a relationship, right? So as a trainer or coach, and this is built on embodied skills, what's the relationship you have, your relational skills which come through the body, a key aspect here. So working down a little bit here, we've got principles. So principles that make embodiment work in training and coaching. I'll come back to some of these. Then lower level, we've got the techniques. So yep, you need some techniques. You need some body techniques to do. Not the most important part. And anyway, the techniques are all built on mindfulness. They're built on what we call micro skills. These basically being aware of posture, breath, movement, those skills that we build through our own personal practices, the building blocks of the technique. If I'm teaching a centering technique, then my ability to say observe people's breathing, observe people's posture, that's really important. I'm saying, okay, this person's already triggered. Maybe it's social anxiety of being asked to volunteer in the training for the centering exercise. Maybe I don't want to grab them or throw the tissue at them even. That's the kind of observing skill that, having done this many, many times, when I get a volunteer to do centering, I'm observing all kinds of things, including in my own body as well. So those basic skills that build up. A little nice quote here from Emily Conrad while we're moving to the next section. Movement is what we are, not something we do. And add to that, movement is how we create what we are. So that basis of being, once again, in that. So the micro skills I've talked about there, they begin to track posture, breathing, movement. There's much within that. So you could have a practice which is, say, good with posture, and that could help you as a coach to be able to work with people's postures. But what about movement? What about breathing? What about visualization? So there's a key piece there, and I'd say sort of loving connection is the part that holds this all together. I'm a big hippie in that way, I know. Yeah, so in terms of working with people as a coach and as a trainer with groups, particularly in mainstream groups, this element from Paul Linden, this influence of prove it, the no guru method, we call it, away from some of those sort of more Asian influences from the pre-modern influences, but more modernist perspective is actually saying prove it. That works really well with clients. Building experiments, building people can do things. And, everything I just said for you as a coach, then, of course, we start moving to working with clients. That goes with them. So how do you build awareness with a client? Well, you could ask them to feel their body. That goes a long way. You could ask them to mirror them. I remember there's one corporate executive I was working with, and I just said, listen, John, can I sit? It wasn't called John, but let's call him John. I said, John, can I sit how you're sitting? I just want to show you how you come across. And he was like, yeah, whatever. And I sat like he was sitting, and he just looked at me, and he didn't know whether to be angry for a while. And then he just laughed and went, wow, yeah, I can see that guy looks like a real asshole. And I was like, well, I wouldn't put it like that, John. We have our reasons. I kind of, softened it a bit with him. But he was able to see why he was pissing people off just because I, did his posture, as it were. Now, you got to be careful with that. You get permission that there's enough relationship to do that. So drawing people's attention to what they can feel is great. They might not know what to do with that, or they might just not be feeling, depending on the level of body awareness they have. So sometimes I might say, what are you doing with your breath? Or what, if anything, are you doing with the breath? Kind of clean language like this. What is your angle? Is your pelvis tilted out? If I'm looking at posture, you can point things out to people and tell them, I think this is basic sound coaching principle. If you just tell people stuff, it tends not to stick. They tend not to really own it, as it were. They tend to reject it. You can do 360s from other people as well, but certainly building that skill in clients of checking in with their bodies, being aware of their bodies. What do you notice, and helping them have some language for that, I think is is pretty key. You can use a model for this, like talk about 4 elements model earlier. I'll do a whole series on that later on. I'm sure a whole podcast on that, where you're giving them a model, and it could be 4 elements or 5 elements or archetypes or Enneagram, or I've done embodied Myers-Briggs, embodied DISC for some of my corporate clients, and you get someone to go through the different options in the body and feel which is familiar. Being careful not to confuse familiar and longed for or just liked, but which is comfortable, which is their home base. I've done this with whole companies. It's really interesting. There was one in Sitges, I believe, yes, outside of Barcelona, and the company flew in from all different locations around the world to this nice hotel, and had about 100 people in a room, big room, and the different offices were there. So they were engineering in aerospace type company, pretty kind of hard-nosed, scientific-y, mathematically kind of dry kind of people, nice bunch. And I got them to do 4 elements. Then we stood in different parts of the room, so I had some posters up for each element. And it was like, oh, there's the HR department, all watery over there, kind of receiving and empathic. Oh, there's the New York office in the fiery side. Oh, there's the Singapore office, a bit more earthy and watery. Oh, there's the Amsterdam office. And when we started, there's the sales team. We started to see the different parts of the company and the different national cultures and cultures within that through this lens, and help them move from they're just broken, what the hell is wrong with the British office, they're just a bunch of pussies, to actually being able to see that they had a different way of doing things, a different embodiment, a different style. And by stepping into those embodiments, they actually get some empathy for it. It was like, wow, this is what it's like to be, excuse my American accent now, this is what it's like to be an uptight British guy. They were kind of freaked out by it, but also got a lot of empathy for that. Can use 4 elements in one-to-one coaching. That's one of the tools I'm going to come on to. I'll come on to that in a little bit, but it's all about showing strengths and weaknesses of different communication styles, whether it's in a coaching or in a whole department or whole team. Doing that through the body is a fun way to do it. It's like this really, like, you have a room full of people doing that. It's fun. It's interactive. It's lively, it's juicy when you've got a whole room full of people doing that in a training environment. Like, it's way better than just boring people with a PowerPoint presentation. And they say that, like, even groups are going to be quite straight-laced. So like, wow, this is really good interactive stuff. I like it. Yeah. So getting people moving around the room. In a corporate group, I might do something really simple to begin. Like, I might start with a corporate PowerPoint type, familiar presentation about the subject, and then get them up and moving about. That can be a first thing. Talked about the rhythms before, didn't I? I did a whole podcast, that's a slightly shorter one, but a podcast on rhythms. That's a nice model to bring in. Looking with clients, with a coaching client, you can just with a handshake or a hug if you know them better. Any simple task, really, about how they do rhythm, how they do beginnings, middles, ends, and ended, how they do rests. That's a really nice one to do as a coach or a trainer, is to introduce individuals or groups to that model. I think I covered that in another podcast, so I won't talk about it more now. The turning on, turning off, that model can have a lot of juice. Let's say I'm coaching someone on relationships. I was talking to someone on the phone today who seems to go from relationship to relationship without a rest. So, looking at that seasons model, talking to them about winter might be very helpful, getting them to experience how that is in the body and why it might be hard. Or the executive, it starts a lot of things but doesn't finish them, or one who takes a long time to warm up in business meetings, coaching them using that model. Super simple, super useful for people. All right. Coaching tools. So let's get down to the nuts and bolts of this. What are some of the one-to-one tools you can use, either as a coach or if you're wanting to move into this field? Awareness and choice is overarching principle here. I'll come back to principles, but that's kind of the overarching things. You're helping a client become aware of their patterns and helping them choose other ways of being. So short term, that look like state regulation. Long term, that can look like developing a practice, developing a way of being. So that's the overarching principle here of any group, any individual you're coaching or working with. That's what you're doing. Walking. Let's start there. Super simple. Videos on this online. Walking with stuck coachees. So you're working with a coachee And this equally, think of this, if you're not a coach and you're listening to this, you don't want to be, think of this in terms of like how you can have useful conversations with people. If my friend says he's stuck around a subject, I could sit there with him all day, or I could get the bugger up and go for a walk along the beach and go into different environments and move in different ways and help unstick him that way. You don't have to walk in a kind of silly Monty Python way. I can be more influential with coaches, like slowing down or speeding up my walk if they're walking with me. Ways to do that, sometimes it's even arm in arm, not all coaches you can do that with, obviously, but just slowing down or stopping at certain moments, you can bring their emphasis also to things like, where's their attention? Is it all just on all where they're going or where they've come from? Is it on the environment or their self? There's lots of models you can bring out with coaching. A simple one is like, I ask them to walk, notice how you walk, and then say, how do you want to be? Walk how you'd like to be. How would you walk if you were a bit more confident or a bit more relaxed or, whatever it is. So walking, ridiculously simple tool. Who said coaching has to be done in 2 chairs, right? Like I remember I taught some students for ages on embodied coaching. I taught them maybe 10 days training. I said, right, let's do some practice, grab a coaching client, let's just do some coaching. And every single one of them took chairs and sat down in chairs. I was like, guys, where have you been the last 10 days? You could stand up, you could lie on the floor, you could look out the window, you could, as I said, walk, you could run, you do the coaching in any manner, back to back, leaning on each other. There's so many different variations, and both of you sitting in a chair facing each other. Just use your creativity. Yeah. Okay, so we did some centering coaching. Actually, let me actually kind of coach you now with this. Well, think of something you want to work on for this podcast that is a little challenge in your life. Nothing traumatic, nothing hardcore. Something little challenge you've got going in your life. It might be, should I move house, or what hobby should I take up, or some sort of simple practical challenge like that. And notice the challenge. Notice how you frame it. So I'll give you a few seconds to think of something. So as a coach, I might say, what do you want coaching on today? Or I might say, what's the challenge you want to work with, or what's the problem, or whatever it is. And then I do some centering. So do that now. Do a quick ABC again. So it's aware, feeling your body, balancing your body, relaxing your core, thinking of someone who makes you smile. And then ask yourself again what the coaching question is. So ask yourself again, what is the challenge? You might well find, even with that 30 seconds of centering, the framing changes. I certainly know people come to a coaching session, they go, blah, 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 blah. I say, hey, John, it's imaginary John again. I say, may I interrupt you? I say, yeah. Relax, breathe, put your feet on the ground. Even if I haven't taught them centering, you can do this, right? Take a deep breath. I model it. A lot of this in coaching is I'm doing what you want the client to do to help them in their process. So, I'm doing the thing I'm asking them, in this case, centering. If I'm standing, this works on Skype equally well, but a little bit better if you're next to them and they're able to mirror neuron that. And I say, okay, tell me again what the problem is. And what was it the other day? I was working on a couple of days ago on this, and they went from the problem is this, and then my husband, and and then just breathed and went, okay, here's what I want, and told me, and we saved so much time on that coaching session just by the fact that they were able to reframe the question much more helpfully. As you probably know, a major tenet of coaching is that when people ask the right question, the answers come very easily, and they have their own answers, kind of humanistic thread, if you will. And that's definitely been my experience. So even just a little bit of centering. And obviously, as a coach, why would I not center? Why would I not center to have more of my best coaching sessions? There's those coaching sessions where you just nail it, and it's like you want more of those, right? Or those training sessions where you're just like completely in sync with the group, in your groove. Well, assuming you're taking care of the basics, like your biology and sleep and stuff like that, why not? Yeah, why not? Helping people coach. I've done this at Center to get to purpose, to get over stuff around financial issues they're having, problems. There's some video on me online of me on YouTube of coaching someone live who's got a purpose issue. A couple of them actually putting purpose coaching, and another one of me, someone that find it difficult to charge money. Like money issues are really common, and helping. I'm helping this client center and ask for the amount of money that he knows he can get for his services, and he's kind of nervous to ask for. Okay, other simple coaching tools, exaggeration and contrast. Yeah. So, someone says, oh, I've got an issue with confidence. I want to find myself get nervous. I'd say, great, exaggerate that. Show me what it's like to be really nervous in the body. Right. Contrast that with something else. How is that? Oh, look, you just taught yourself to be confident in the body. Exaggeration and contrast. Again, videos online. This is a simple, straightforward way of working with people. It's one of the basic principles of embodiment. I think it was Wendy Palmer I first come across. It said the body learns through exaggeration and contrast. You can't just tell the body what to do. You have to show it different options. And sometimes you go kind of more into the less useful habit and they go, oh, okay, that's how I construct that in my body. That's how I do it. And you can become aware of some of the sort of early warning signs, the red lights, as it were. The next one, really useful technique working in coaching is making distinction coaching. I call this, again, video online. Often people have unconsciously conflated two things. Let me give you some of the classics I see again and again in coaching. Being aggressive and assertive, for example, or being nice and being a pushover, being a good human, being an ethical person and being a wimp. So if you've conflated two things like that unconsciously in your mind, why would you do the positive? You wouldn't. You avoid it because you don't want to do the negative. So the person who's a little bit, we might say yin, ends up not being assertive because they don't know how to do that differently from being aggressive. And because they're scared of being aggressive, they're a good person. They don't want to be aggressive. They also are not assertive. So does that make sense? I hope it does. So distinguishing in the body. You can try this now. Like, do you have a distinction between, say, those two things? How would you, again, I'm not sure if you're sitting, standing, walking, whatever, cycling, how would you do that in an aggressive way versus an assertive way? See if you can find two distinctions in the body. For me, I can give you a few pointers. It might be around the breath. It might be around relaxation level, posture. Check that out. I'm going to give you a few seconds just to play with that. Okay, so I'm not going to leave it too long. I'll give you a lot longer in real life and a lot more support, but, it's a podcast and I don't leave too much blank space there. Lots of other things that could be between being creative and being flaky, being confident versus being arrogant, etc., etc. You give people a choice back by separating out two things that may have got stuck together. And often I see when people aren't changing, that's nearly always what's missing, actually. It's surprisingly useful and robust as a technique. Another thing you can do for clients, for coaches, is to create simulators with the body of what's happening and B, potential solutions to what's happening. So a classic one, what was it the other day? What I've done a lot of times is people say my boss looks over my shoulder, so I literally do that. Or I feel like there's a weight on my shoulders, so I actually put my hands, with permission, on their shoulders and put a weight there so they can get a really felt sense of it. And then we start looking at, okay, what might alternatives be like, and creating simulators for that. This is a lot of the centering work. It's like if you're becoming a pilot, they don't give you a jumbo jet straight away, right? They give you a flight simulator. So that's the same with a lot of the centering work. So virtually creating practices. This is the simulators that we make with the body as a coach to create simulate situations of things either they're in or that they might want to move into. Listening to the body. Remarkably simple technique, ways to do this. You say to your client, even really straight-laced coaching clients I've had, I'll say, what does your body say about this issue? Yeah, what does your body say? And they'll say, I don't know, that's a weird question. I'll say, just humour me here. Just humour me. What does the body say? And they'll feel their body and they go, and something will come up and it might be an abstract image or a picture. But often it's just like, wow, some insight. Yeah. You can do whole sort of things like something called focusing. Paul Linden has a process called following the body. There's much more in-depth versions. But again, I just invite you to that now. Like, come back to your little coaching challenge you're thinking about earlier. Ask your body the question, like, okay, should I move house? Or what car should I buy? Or whatever it is. Close your eyes, notice your sensation, and just see what happens. Again, it might be nothing much. It might be something huge. See what it was. Again, if it wasn't a podcast, I'd give you a bit longer than that and help you tune in. But this listening to the body, certainly something you can help people with. There's more abstract, ways where you get a whole group to just kind of move, and this idea of the body is a verb, it's a process. You get like authentic movement or 5 rhythms. You're getting people moving through a process. A bit more abstract, can be difficult for some sort of corporate groups, for example. But just having your client say, like, okay, stand up, have a shake. Shaking. There's an easy state break one you can use with the body. Wiggle around. Okay, have a stretch. Okay, now tell me again what's going on. Again, just by letting the body kind of follow that process, to unwind that process. Doesn't have to be dancing to music. Even just a little stretch and a move can have great results for clients. Or you could move them through a bunch of possibilities, like the 4 elements we talked about earlier. I do 4 elements coaching. Again, Google it. Lots online, lots on YouTube. Where I take clients through a problem and I say, okay, what would it look like from this point of view? What would it look like from that point of view? I remember I was in Turkey teaching once, and there was someone there. They're like, they were thinking, what neighborhood should I move to? Yeah, what neighborhood should I move to? And we looked at it from a different perspective. And earthly, it was like, okay, make an Excel spreadsheet. And they're like, oh, I never thought to be that organised, put pluses and minuses. And then I move them into a watery body, and they're like, oh, I could ask my friends. I'd never thought to do that. I could ask for help. And then we got into the fiery body, and they were just like, right, just do it, And that was kind of how they were anyway. So they were like, okay, it doesn't help much. Then we got to airy, and we thought of a creative idea. And I think the creative idea that was that this woman was to go sit in cafes, she liked drinking coffee, and look at the men in different neighbourhoods and decide which was the best looking neighbourhood. That was her homework for this, because it was just like a fun, silly idea. The reason she wasn't doing it is it wasn't very enjoyable, this process of sort of researching neighbourhoods online. So we found this fun, creative way to do it by getting it into a sort of airy, creative embodiment. On the videos, it's much easier to see how I do that. I might get to stand on a chair and wave our arms about. With earth, it's like sitting square on the chair, moving in a square way. With fire, I might have them push against me. With water, I take their, help them relax and soften and open. Yeah. So this starts to become like a problem-solving methodology. And then obviously as a coach or as a trainer, whatever you do, you can get and think about this in the wider context. Pick a phrase and actually practice this with me. Pick a phrase, and I'm going to say my phrase, and you can create the same one, or if you use another phrase that's typical, something you say a lot in coaching, or maybe open a coaching session with, and I want you to say it in different embodiments, right? So let's say, what do you want to get out of today's session? So that's my sort of neutral, which is not neutral at all, of course, because it's me, it's my personality. Now I'm going to sit in a squarer, more, we might say, grounded way, feet flat in my chair, slow down, bring my breath into my belly, slow down a bit, palms down. If you're standing, or walking, you can adapt this to walking in a more slow, steady way or whatever. And now I'm going to say, what do you want to get out of today's session? It's going to have a very different impact saying it in that way. And you may be noticing as I'm shifting to a more earthy way of being, I'm not really acting this, I'm just finding it in myself, that you may have a different response to listening to my voice, because I'm not normally this sort of slow and steady. You might like it, you might not. Different clients, right, are going to react better or worse. Now, water, relax, tilt your pelvis back so your belly button's pointing more in the air, open your arms, soften your breath, soften your peripheral vision. Sway your hips a little if you're walking or standing. Let the shoulders be relaxed. Everything's soft. And then I'm going to say again, and you say your phrase, please. What do you want to get from today's session? Much more receptive, much more watery. Say your phrase again. Notice how that's different. How would that land differently with clients? How would different clients be attracted to you, etc., etc. Right, now lean forwards in your chair, push your hands together, feel your muscles. Like speaking, resist a bit of fiery, breathe a little bit more into the chest, look straight ahead, and say, what do you want to get out of today's session? Or your phrase. Again, for me, that's fairly straightforward. Didn't take much getting into for me. Actually, I noticed tonight there's a situational element. It's a little bit late here when I'm recording, and I'm not in a fiery mode today. I've kind of been working quite hard, and I'm in a more chill mode slightly. So I'm noticing my resistance to that. If I was coaching someone that really needed fire right now, it might actually be tricky for me. It's again the self-awareness, yeah. So certain clients are going to like that. Certain points in the coaching, you might say, great, I've listened to you with empathy for half an hour, but come on, mate, what are you doing? Right, let's get it together. What's the action points, yeah? So there's a time and a place for that in any coaching session. Then now sit up in your chair or stand a little taller, move your fingers a little bit, look around you, feel your face, move your hands in slightly creative ways, and then say the phrase again, what do you want to get out of today's session? And now it's like fun, it's playful, or maybe it's like, wow, anything's possible. what do you want to get out of today's session? Anything's possible. Yeah. So being able to move into that airy way, which again, there's one client I was working with who was he was the founder of a small tech company. There's a lot of tech where I live in Brighton. It's like Silicon Beach, they call it. And he was one of these sort of visionary founder types. And he liked training to be really like, what's possible, So he really liked that, but he also needed the earth, of course. So there's a few ways you can work with clients to help them kind of access different states, even if it's just shaking or stretching or walking. 4 Elements ones, maybe easy to see on the video, so I recommend the videos there. I guess also be able to read people a little bit as a coach, like body reading deserves a whole podcast, but the skill of being able to look at people and see different ways of being. Now, it's always a guess, there's always a humility around this, but there's almost a tasting of it with your empathy, plus looking with your brain, your eyes at the sort of what you've learned about, for example, if the femurs rolled in and the feet are pointing in or the feet are pointing out, now that could just be from like ballet training or something, right? If the feet are out, but it could indicate a more extrovert temperament. That's something I've observed, for example. The shoulder roll would be a similar one. There's loads more I can say, sort of body ones, but definitely the key skill here is just looking at someone, letting your empathy fire off and getting a felt sense of what they're like as a coachee. Before you even talk to them, you start to get a sense of like, oh, that's what drives this person. Oh, this is what you're going to relate to, and how I might talk to them. Are they no nonsense practical or are they abstract? Yeah, and then, of course, with clients, talked about practice earlier, your own practices, but, designing practices with a client, look at the podcast on that. There's a whole art to that. Often it's finding things that are challenging enough to help people grow, and as a coach, growing your own range is important practices as well. Left that out earlier, excuse me. The key thing here is that you can help clients grow over time to embed in those insights they're having in a training or coaching situation. I think that's what the body's really good for, is getting something in the bones, in the muscle, getting it really established. And there's an art to designing practices. A lot of it, with some of my businessy clients, is making it not too inaccessible, making it something they can actually do. I work with busy people, the NGOs even busier than the corporates in many cases, the single mums even busier. So it's, being able to make it small, make it doable. Obviously, as a coach, it's keeping people accountable to their practice. I think that's one of the great things about coaching, So I do anger management intensive sometimes with people. I do 3 or 4 hours and they get a lot of insight and they're like, wow. And they're like, what happens now? I'm like, right, we designed some practices. And then they go away, and 2 weeks later, I'm on the phone to them. I'm saying, Bob, John, the abstract names again. I'm saying, Bob, what's happened? Have you done it? What's going on? What's working? What's not working? How can we work more with that? So, there's sort of listening exercises, there's leader-follower exercises, really good exercise. You can try this with a coachee. We'll get a whole group to do it. It's get them to move backwards and forwards with their palms touching, backwards and forwards, palms facing each other with palms touching, backwards and forwards, and saying, okay, what comes up? And if you're paying attention, loads of relational stuff will come up for your coachee or, the participants in the group. And it'll be like, oh, look at that, you're really open. Or, what do you notice about the space? So you're keeping people far away. Or have you noticed your hands are over the top of my hands? You're controlling me with your thumbs. Or there's so many ways that can go. Look at my video on leader follower. That's a great little one. It's a little simulator, if you will, that you can use as a coach. Embodied yoga principles, postures. There are another ones you can use. Loads of videos online about me using postures, having people stand in certain ways. And again, I guess the key thing here is that the principles. So whether it's, walking through the 4 elements or 5 elements, whatever, walking through an embodied yoga posture, getting them to stand and say warrior posture, is the principle here is to ask what's familiar and then to help people build their range into something new. So these principles are the kind of key thing. I would work with here. I was coaching someone on taking up space. We got them doing some posture where they stand like a big X with their arms and legs out, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is terrifying." And I'm like, "Okay, well, if you can bear it, stay with it. Let's practice this." And over a course of weeks of practicing for 1 minute a day, this woman was a pretty busy executive from Sweden. It's like she got better at doing that, and she got more comfortable with it. Then it starts showing up in the boardroom in terms of her being able to stand up and say what she wanted to say and take space that way. Yeah. Okay, groups. Yeah, I can think of this as like a cycle. Maybe this is put back to seasons again, really, being able to start off building connection and trust, establish authority and care, ice breaking, introducing the subject, moving into the kind of the juicy stuff of the embodiment. So you don't just dive straight in there with hardcore embodied work. You're going to build up to that. Something insightful, something emotional, perhaps something intense, and then bringing it back into clarity. So, yep, you do the embodied bit. Often that's like the meat in the sandwich, that's the middle part. Often I'm starting out with something a bit more conventional and bringing people back to something a bit more conventional. So this is the hero's journey again. If you heard the podcast that include that before, that you're going back to the ordinary world. You're taking them into the depths of embodiment, but then you're bringing them out of that back to reality with like, okay, what are the action points? For me, teaching embodiment, you develop the relationship first, having a clear aim with the client. It's really important. Like, what do you guys want to get from this? Connect it to their motivation, give them clear instructions. Listen to the one again on Working Business, a Guide for Hippies. Applying it back to what's useful for them, the daily reality for them, whatever the coachee or the group does, and helping them establish something to get it to sink in. I'm actually assessing quite a lot on EFC. We're assessing coaches and trainers of all different kinds, some of whom are coming more from the corporate, some of them more from the body background on these different things. And there's a bunch of criteria we assess them on. Ethics, of course, do no harm, service orientation, and that it's not like I've ever seen anyone do something grossly unethical in an exam, but it might just be doing something which doesn't feel like it quite serves the client. Or not quite consenting for what you want to do with them. I've definitely seen that. Coming back to the facilitator's own embodiment, that's one of the things we're most keen on, and they can use what we call body leadership as another exam criteria that we use. They're clear aims, they're working with different range of tools for different people. You're not, as a coach or a trainer, just doing your favourite thing. Let's say your favourite thing is centering, and you got a lot from that. Or your favourite thing is working with cycles, and it's like, well, yeah, but what does the client need? Different things for different people. Being able to adapt, that's another one of our exam criteria. Adapt to participants, their individual needs, their cultural needs. What you do in Russia, you can't do in Israel, you can't do in France. There's got to be an adaptation there. And listening. So this is the weird thing about doing a podcast, is that I'm used to teaching a group where I'm tracking the group. And I'm going, okay, are they getting this? Maybe I'm speaking too quick again. Are they enjoying it? Do I need a joke here? What's the energy, if you will? I hate that word, of the group. And actually tracking that, which is the weirdest thing doing a podcast, because I have no idea how you are. I have no idea how you're doing. And that's just something I've trained myself working with embodiment training and coaching, is to really pay a lot of attention to the other person or the group that I'm working with. Obviously paying attention to the language. We talked about rhythm before, testing things, making things testable. I find that's very empowering for clients, because you're not the guru, right? If you're testing it, and again, don't believe a word I say, let me practice what I teach, that you're actually testing things out and saying, okay, does that work? Yeah, that's an empowering thing. And making them get it back into the real world. Often my clients, if they're not like embodiment type people, they'll do weird stuff, but they're like, make it real for me. What is the so what, if you will? So what? Whew, a lot there. I'm going to leave that another time. So the science stuff here, a little bit of science. I'll do a whole another podcast on that. But the science of embodiment, I think, is worth knowing about in a training and coaching context. Let's end this with, as we move towards the conclusion, with a few reflections. So what would you say were your own strengths and your own areas to develop as a coach or a facilitator? And again, if you're listening to this and that's not your profession, it might be, as someone who has useful conversations in other areas. What strengths do you need to build? What skills? How does your 4-element preference show up? Are you I haven't explained that model much, but I think it's pretty intuitive. Are you kind of earthy person, does everything by the book and has to have a really solid plan for everything? Or are you fiery and a bit results driven? Yeah, that's good and bad, right? Are you someone super empathic that gives everyone a lot of time to talk and listen to everyone's, but disadvantages there? You're a very airy trainer, likes to be creative, but maybe is a bit off the wall sometimes. How would you rate yourself on different areas of embodied intelligence? So self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social influence. Feel free to pause the podcast, by the way, if you think about these or talk about these and so on. what practices do you have? Like, what practices do you have that are developing you as a trainer or coach? Yeah, what might you need? What peers, mentors, and communities are you a part of that would be helpful for this? So, you know, the EYP or the EFC communities, the two main communities that I lead. That community is what does a lot of the work around people. That community is what supports people when the times are tough, gives them feedback, challenges people. People can come to each other with ethical issues. You know, that's major, major, major. How does your season preference show up? Do you like to rush into things like me? You're into the sort of deep middle bit. Do you like the endings? You drag that out. What's your season preference? As a facilitator, again, you know, your coaching session, is it got a beginning, middle, and end? Is a bit some of that condensed or rushed? So as I went through those criteria for excellence, which do you think you do well at? So criteria for excellence, exam criteria that we use, you know, the aims, the tool use, the listening, body leadership, language use, testing, application. And what other professional skills do you need to bring this out? So let's say you're an amazing, excellent embodiment teacher. Well, what other skills do you need? You know, you like marketing, for example. I've helped a lot of people with marketing because it's like, yep, they've got the body skills. They're a great facilitator, but how do you get that to people? What other skills do you need? Yeah. So I hope you have found this useful. If other videos, lots and lots of videos illustrate some of these things online. So pretty much any of the demos, look at the ebook. It's on embodifacilitator.com, free ebook. That's what I've been using as the guide for this session, and probably more structured. And it's got illustrations and links to all those videos on there. So that's worth taking a look at. There's things I haven't covered, like shadow. I could have gone through the ICF competencies and how they all are embodied. You know, that's another angle on this. There's loads more I could say there. If you're interested in working with body and training coaching, let me just give you some resources. So Richard Strozzi Heckler, his somatic coaching book's very good. Ginny Whitelaw, Wendy Palmer, his leadership embodiment work's very good. Stuart Heller, Paul Linden. In terms of training and coaching, probably looking at Richard Strozzi Heckler as one of the biggest names in the field as embodied training and coaching, I would say. I think embodied coaching might actually be his trademark. There's lots of other great embodiment teachers, for example, like, you know, I think Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, one of the best embodiment teachers out there, still alive, but maybe not so much in the training and coaching domain. So I want to acknowledge, you know, all these people as being teachers of mine. Some of them more or less, you know, I don't want to claim too much. Some of them might be upset by that, actually. But certainly they're all people that have influenced me. I think it's worth acknowledging them. A lot of this podcast comes from their work in different ways. You know, I've mentioned Wendy, Paul Linden, Richard Strozzi Heckler, Stuart Heller, Ginny Whitelaw again. Also my own community, to acknowledge Francis Bryars and Alexandra Vovoskaya and Rachel Blackman, who are the EFC teachers. And we've really developed a lot of these models together, a lot of this understanding together from years of working with other trainers and coaches. You know, this is, I'm not going to always say this on this podcast, but this is one of those things that I have really looked into, and I'm open to questions on the Facebook group. If you want to invite me to teach, you know, or to speak at different events for coaches and trainers, that's always fun. I'm always doing that. I've done this around the world. So yeah, we've just scratched the surface here, really. But I hope this has been useful. You can look at the online series, The Body of Coaching. That's another resource for you there. Embodied Yoga Principles, I mentioned briefly. The YouTube channel is the main one. But yeah, I hope this has been useful for you. There's some rambling. It's kind of late now. Time for a bath and go to bed, I think. So, signing out. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.